What happens when a policy meant to stimulate domestic innovation ends up strengthening your main geopolitical competitor? This is the dilemma facing the United States as it rethinks its approach to subsidizing electric vehicles. Subsidies that once aimed to build an American clean energy future have instead fueled the rise of a global supply chain centered in East Asia. The Trump administration's decision to cancel key EV incentives was not just economic, it was strategic. Yet doing so has set off a complex cascade of consequences for companies like Tesla, for U.S. climate policy, and for global industrial alignment. This is the story of how clean energy support turned into an international balancing act, and why decoupling may be easier said than done. When the United States first began offering electric vehicle subsidies, the intention was clear: accelerate the transition to clean energy, reduce emissions, and create a new wave of domestic manufacturing jobs. These incentives were generous, offering up to $7,500 per qualifying vehicle. But as electric vehicles became more mainstream, something unexpected happened. Analysts began to track where those dollars were truly going. It turned out that for every dollar the U.S. government spent on an electric vehicle subsidy, up to 80 cents ended up in the hands of suppliers based in China. The reason? American automakers, including Tesla, rely heavily on a deeply integrated, foreign-dominated supply chain. This includes everything from lithium-ion battery cells to rare earth magnets, electronic control systems, and thermal management components. To many in Washington, this was not just an economic oversight, it was a strategic vulnerability. Instead of fueling domestic innovation, the subsidies appeared to be enriching a competing industrial ecosystem. That realization led to a political pivot, spearheaded by the Trump administration, to halt or reduce EV subsidies. While the decision was controversial, it was based on a cold financial and strategic logic. Why continue writing checks that ultimately benefit a rival? Perhaps no company illustrates the paradox more clearly than Tesla. Though headquartered in California and often touted as a symbol of American innovation, Tesla's operations reveal a complex picture. Its Shanghai Gigafactory has emerged as a crown jewel of global EV manufacturing, with a localization rate of up to 95%. That means nearly all the parts and labor involved in making those vehicles come from within China. The efficiency of the Shanghai facility is staggering. Every 45 seconds, a new Model Y vehicle rolls off the production line. This productivity is enabled by more than 400 local suppliers, some of which provide advanced components that remain unmatched in the West. Chinese battery giant CL, for example, supplies lithium iron phosphate batteries known for their durability and low cost. Other firms contribute precision die-cast components, intelligent thermal systems, and next-generation battery materials. The result? The cost of producing a Model Y in Shanghai is 28% lower than producing the same vehicle in the United States. That price advantage alone makes Tesla's global strategy reliant on its Chinese operations. In fact, 3 of Tesla's top 5 battery suppliers are Chinese firms. Even Tesla's Berlin factory uses Chinese battery modules, clearly labeled "Made in China." Thus, while U.S. politicians hailed Tesla as a national success story, many came to view it as a mixed blessing, a company that, while American in name, relied heavily on foreign infrastructure. To some, Tesla became a kind of Trojan horse, a domestic brand whose profits and processes increasingly benefited external actors. That perception further fueled the push to reconsider federal support. There were political calculations too. While Tesla dominated headlines, traditional automakers such as Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis still represented the heart of American manufacturing. These companies, although slower to transition to electric models, maintained extensive U.S.-based supply chains and tens of thousands of unionized jobs. In contrast, Tesla operated non-unionized plants and outsourced much of its critical component sourcing. In 2024, new energy vehicles accounted for less than 10% of total U.S. vehicle sales. Internal combustion engines still ruled the road, and the companies producing them remained politically powerful. Supporting Tesla with continued subsidies risked alienating a much larger voting bloc, especially in industrial swing states. By shifting support away from Tesla and toward traditional automakers, or cutting it entirely, the Trump administration aimed to shore up domestic industry and secure electoral loyalty. Trump's decision was also framed as a defensive measure. Globally, China had surged ahead in key clean energy sectors. In photovoltaics, Chinese firms held over 85% of global market share. 9 of the world's 10 largest solar panel companies were based in China. In wind energy, the picture was similar. If the U.S. wanted to expand renewable energy generation, it would almost certainly have to rely on imported Chinese turbines and components. Continuing subsidies in this context, some argued, was like giving your competitor a head start, using your own resources. The assumption that cutting subsidies would choke off foreign gains proved overly optimistic. Chinese companies quickly responded by altering their geography rather than their goals. A wave of EV supply chain investment began flowing into Mexico. Thanks to the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, Auto parts produced in Mexico could enter the U.S. market tariff-free. Chinese firms saw an opportunity. They began replicating the Shanghai factory model in northern Mexico, bringing not only capital but also technical know-how and management systems. While components were now technically North American, the origin of the expertise remained unchanged. In practice, Chinese firms continued to supply American EVs, just from across the border. Ironically, the same walls meant to block global competition created a convenient doorway. The Trump-era strategy to enforce industrial decoupling ended up encouraging supply chain circumvention. Rather than severing ties, it forced competitors to innovate in distribution. At the same time, East Asia saw an emerging opportunity. As the U.S. turned inward, China, Japan, and South Korea began aligning their manufacturing and trade strategies. In early 2025, South Korea's exports to China rose nearly 7%. Japanese companies such as Sony shifted major parts of their production to Chinese provinces. A regional economic bloc with an estimated output of over $43 trillion began to take shape, without needing Western subsidies. These nations also enjoyed structural advantages. China's average battery production cost stood at just $80 per kilowatt-hour, 33% lower than U.S. figures. Moreover, China held 72% of global patents related to electric vehicle propulsion systems. With over 30 billion yuan invested annually in research and development, its lead continued to widen. The U.S., by contrast, faced rising costs and regulatory challenges. Federal wind power projects were delayed. Offshore installations representing 65% of planned capacity risked cancellation. Meanwhile, the Biden administration's earlier climate incentives faced rollback. A clause requiring full North American sourcing for battery minerals by 2029 proved unworkable. The domestic mining and refining infrastructure simply did not exist. The consequences for clean energy policy have been sobering. If the U.S. were to fully exit the Paris Agreement again and abandon its decarbonization targets, global carbon emissions could rise by 120 million tons annually. States like Georgia, which spent $50 million to promote electric vehicles, saw only a modest increase of 10,000 cars, a poor return on investment. Tesla, too, faced significant financial headwinds. The end of subsidies threatened to erase $1.2 billion in annual profits. Carbon credit trading, especially in California, stood to lose another $595 million. While Tesla looked to expand globally, its U.S. operations faced a tougher road. For Chinese suppliers, however, global demand kept rising. European, Southeast Asian, and Latin American markets continued adopting electric vehicles at scale. As the U.S. withdrew, others advanced. In many ways, American disengagement became the opening competitors had been waiting for. The story of U.S. electric vehicle subsidies reveals a deeper tension between industrial ambition and geopolitical realism. Cutting support may preserve short-term political capital, but it risks long-term strategic disadvantage. Without full control over its supply chain, from lithium extraction to battery recycling, the United States remains tethered to a system it does not own. As nations compete to define the energy future, success will depend not just on innovation, but on integration. Whoever masters the full ecosystem, from minerals to markets, will shape the next industrial era. Whether the United States can reclaim that ground remains an open question.